Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more. Hey y'all, it's Kelly. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast. This episode of the podcast is a conversation with Samuel Bautista Lazo, who was on the very first episode of the podcast. And Samuel and I met years ago at the Buckeye Earth Skills Gathering, and that's where we recorded the first episode, actually in person. And if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I would highly recommend it. It's been one of my favorites, and a lot of other people have really enjoyed Samuel's words in that episode. Since COVID hit, I've been in conversation with Samuel online about potentially doing another episode, so we decided recently to record another interview, and this time over Zoom because Samuel is in his hometown and with his family. It was really sweet to talk more with Samuel about the way of life there in his village right now, and also there's some really important big things happening in Mexico and in the region of Oaxaca in general that I feel like are important issues to amplify right now. In this episode with Samuel speaks to what life has been like during the pandemic in his village. Samuel reflects a little bit on our conversation from Lake Concal, California during the Buckeye Gathering several years ago, which was episode 1 of the podcast, which I mentioned earlier, and the fire that has come through since. So the campfire or the paradise fire is the fire we're referring to there, and Samuel's perspective on how the pandemic has caused the world to slow down and the land is cleansed by our pause, the way the fire cleanses the land. We speak a little bit about comparing fire to the pandemic. We also talk about the destructive corporate energy projects trying to move forth in the state of Oaxaca in the country of Mexico, and the ways in which these projects are abusive towards the indigenous peoples of Mexico and is environmentally devastating. Samuel speaks from his perspective as an indigenous person who studied industrial agriculture. He actually has a Ph.D. He speaks about the bigger picture of needing to change our consumption and production patterns as a society, especially in the U.S., which consumes more than most countries in the world. Samuel speaks to the recent murder of a biology student in Oaxaca, one of many of these murders that have occurred over the years, due to his interest in the biodiversity of the region and his love of nature. That makes me really think about my own ease and ability to be curious about nature and plants and the land, and how often my life is not in danger because of that curiosity. We also talk about how Mexico's economy is still rooted in a destructive resource extraction and development model despite having a current progressive president. We talk about the potentially devastating effects of the Itmas Rail Corridor project and the Mayan Train project that are planned for the region on indigenous communities and the environment. We speak a little bit on environmental racism, how capitalism can affect indigenous populations, how rain feeds the land and spirit and promotes connection to self-sufficiency. We speak to coming back to the corn and the milpa food systems. Samuel speaks to the importance of dry farming, especially the milpa system in Oaxaca, and how important it is to their way of life. We speak a bit about milpa farming in relationship to wild tending, feeding wild animals, and the definitions of agriculture, the recovery of native lands during the Mexican Revolution. We speak about how colonization and Western ideas of how land should be taken care of affects indigenous people's ability in Mexico to keep their land they have tended for thousands of years. We speak to how allowing the land to rest keeps the soil and ecosystem healthy, and how it is connected and intertwined to practices of wild tending and small-scale agriculture. And lastly, we speak to how linear systems informed by capitalism that emphasize extraction, production, and discarding don't leave room for cyclical land-based worldviews. Alright, and with that, let's go ahead and get to this second conversation with Samuel on the Ground Shots podcast. Happy listening, y'all. Burn, burn with the light that reveals our faces. Thanks for being on the podcast again, Samuel.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be back in this new cycle.
Yeah, lots happened since the last time we were on the podcast together.
Yeah,
Actually, the Buckeye site where we did that first interview burned. So I remember we were sitting on that log and it was like dusk and we were talking and like all of that is burned in a forest fire since.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and then now we're in a pandemic and so yeah, a lot's changed. But so for folks who haven't listened to the first episode of the podcast, which you were featured in, maybe you could give us a brief interview or brief introduction and also talk about what life has been like there in Oaxaca since the pandemic started and yeah, what's happening there.
Okay, so again, my name is Samuel Bautista Lazo, and I am from the town of Xiguie'a, which is known as Teotitlán del Valle in the state of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. And well, I come from a community of weavers, and it's our way of life in this village to carry on the tradition of weaving. And we've specialized on this activity, for a couple thousand years, and we've maintained this tradition as part of our way of life. And it's only recently that we're known more um, because of this craft and skill that we have um, kept and maintained. But yeah, we've been weavers for a very long time, and we've always lived on this little plot of land that we call our, community. And we're at about 5,000 feet above sea level in the Central Valley of Oaxaca. Very fertile valley where our ancestors domesticated corn around 10,000 years ago. But they probably got here since the last ice age, because on our stories of creation, our ancestors remember, our elders remember this valley being an ancient lake. And then when it drained or it dried or evaporated, we had all this silt that made a really nice soil. Um, so yeah, we're at this valley, and we're at the foothills of the northern Sierra Madre mountain range that rises up to 10,000 feet in like 20 kilometers. Don't know how much that is in miles, but it's what time the US picks up on the metric system. But yeah, this is where we live, and it's just beginning to rain. Now we're in May. The cicadas, which we called Xiguie'a, which translates as the dogs of the sun, because they sing out loud, so loud, like the howling of a dog, and they're praying for the rain to fall on the valley, and they announce that rain as well. Things are starting to green up a little bit, which feels really nice and comforting, especially in this time where, with the world pandemic reaching a peak of craziness, and life here remained pretty much business as usual, except that there are no tourists around to buy our craft, which is okay. But these days we pay bills and consume electricity, and we're hooked on this industrial and economic system. So we have, um, we're tethered to the system, but luckily so far we're not fully dependent on it. And as long as it rains, it brings hope and joy to our hearts, because we can still grow corn, or the milpa that we call corn, beans, and squash, that food system. And we could raise our animals and gather foods and grow nopales. So yeah, life it's pretty good. We luckily have had 0 cases in our village, or the surrounding villages. In fact, the whole state of Oaxaca has had the least number of cases. It's the sixth state with the least number of cases in the whole country. And they're very focalized points, mainly in bigger towns where they have a couple dozen cases, couple cases. But overall, last night on the news, they were showing the map and it looks pretty clean, on the alert zones. So yeah, this is where we're at now. And it's a great time, for us to remember to stay healthy, to be self-sufficient and resilient. And of course, we have taken precautions, just following federal government guidelines, and common sense, and big events were canceled, big gatherings, and there's awareness. My cousin just did a little an audio tape where she explains in her native language what is the coronavirus, how it works, and a lot of that information is not available to our elders because a great majority of our elders don't speak Spanish and cannot read either. So the best way of communicating is orally through our local radio station. So yeah, that's where we're at, and very interesting, analogies to what happened with the site at Kanko Lake, because at that time we were talking about there was a lot of talk about managing fires and doing like controlled burns to maintain the ecosystems. And the very fact that happened at that site, right? Like that site needed it, and then the talk was happening, and I don't know if they did some tests where, they did controlled burns on that site or not, but just on the bigger, image, the big picture of things, and those subtle messages that we could read from the universe to what's happening, that cleansing that needed to happen. And if it doesn't happen, if we don't make it happen, eventually, it will happen on its own. And so the cleansing, of the fire came, and then now with this great slowdown of economic and industrial activity, showing how so many parts of the world suddenly are enjoying cleaner air, cleaner skies, wildlife coming into suburbs and cities and towns. And it's giving us a little time to pause. It's forcing us to pause because we haven't chosen to pause voluntarily. So yeah, lots to talk about. And
yeah, that is something to think about. It's ironic that we were speaking on fire and controlled burns and stuff in that interview, and even that land around the lake. It was the Paradise Fire. If people who are listening don't know, it was in California. It was a pretty deadly fire too. Unfortunately, a lot of elders died in that fire because they couldn't get out of their homes, and there was really not easy ways in and out, which is unfortunate that a fire can become so big and massive because of the lack of tending of the land. That we were speaking about that, and there had been some fires there that were big before that, and you could see it on the land, but yeah, that even, yeah, it's crazy, like how massive and devastating it got. And of course it's needed, and I hope that something good will come out of it, of course, the regeneration of the land. But that's something to think about with the pandemic as well, is like this way of it's like a kind of cleansing in the way that it's making us have to stop, and we can see that the earth is like can catch up, and time for us to kind of turn back to ancestral skills and land practices and stuff. And which is something you spoke to as well in that conversation. I wanted to ask too, you've been posting on social media a lot recently about some things that have been happening in Mexico and also in Oaxaca recently. There are a lot of big modernization projects, or like, I don't know if that's the right word, but like corporate projects that are related to maybe foreign corporate interests, creating certain kinds of infrastructure there that is related to resource extraction and that kind of thing. And there's been some resistance to that, and then some people have been killed because of that, both in Mexico and in Oaxaca. And I think I read that there's been a lot more people in the state of Oaxaca killed for some reason too. So environmental activists that have been protesting some of these big energy projects. And there seems to be a few different ones going on, and like different challenges to each one of those projects. And I guess I would love for you to speak to both why those projects are potentially devastating environmentally, and like what's really important about like the biodiversity of, say, Oaxaca specifically, and then what's fueling these projects to continue. And yeah, speak a little bit about this whole topic if you can.
Yeah. Well, just my limited understanding and the view on it is that when you read things like, oh, if we keep consuming at the rate that Americans consume, we need 8 Earths, the size of 8 Earths, to provide for the needs of the people for 2050. When when you actually see that happening, and you see the mining corporations, for example, invading communities here in Oaxaca, because this industrial and economic system, it's resource hungry. We need more steel, we need more precious metals, we need more of this to keep consuming. And so, it becomes really real on your flesh, on your land. And when we were driving to pick up some of our handspun wool to the town of Chichicapan, where all the grandmas are still hand spinning our wool, we noticed so many towns had big signs like, mining is not allowed here. Stop mining. All right, big signs. Like a lot of the towns had big signs on the road because they're genuinely concerned, especially in the southern valley of Ocotlán. There has been a couple mining projects, or several ones. And with the previous presidency of Peña Nieto, there were so many land concessions given to mining companies, mostly international mining companies, that were put into effect. And then they opened up a couple of operations, and in a few years, people immediately noticed the decrease in the quality of life, the poisoning of their waters, and the loss of topsoil, and dumping of waste that is causing just like cancers and other forms of illnesses among the people. And so that quickly led to many communities rising, and fortunately they were able to kick out. I think there's been one or two cases where the community got together and kicked out the mining company out of their villages. And so it's very real how this industrial and economic machinery, it's resource hungry, and we're seeing it move into Oaxaca. For some or another reason, they haven't in the past, mainly because I think Oaxaca being mostly a native population, there's so many little towns around here. So almost every part of the ecosystem is guarded by a community. And so, probably in the past they tended to go further away. Probably they stayed north of Mexico or in the traditional mining areas. And as those mining ores are, depleted, they're obviously looking for new sources. And that's what's been happening. And then the thing is that if you don't know where Oaxaca sits on the continent, so right below the fictional border of the U.S., Mexico starts to come down and narrow, like in a curve, and so Oaxaca sits on the narrowest part of Mexico, and then it curves up and tilts to the peninsula, the Mayan Peninsula. But there's roughly on a straight line about 100 miles from Oaxaca City to the Gulf of Mexico, and then there is roughly another 100 miles or kilometers, can't remember, from Oaxaca City to the Pacific. So it's a really narrow stretch of land that has like 8 regions with very different ecosystems, and 8 major regions that are host to a mega diverse biodiversity of fauna and flora. So it's really rich. And that mega diversity, it's also, I think, based on the diversity of soils that we have in Oaxaca. The types of soils that we have here are really diverse as well. In fact, the region of the Mixtec, La Mixteca, has been designated a geosite by UNESCO because of the many layers of ancient soil strata that is found there. That naturally, leads to the observation that, of course, we probably have also a very rich mineral zone that's finally, attracting all these mining companies here. And so that leads to the other issue that happened recently with the really sad and unfortunate killing of this biology student, Yugi Roy Martinez, who was just taking a break from the COVID-19 and staying in place in a remote cabin that his family owned, just to do his own thing, to document wildlife. Because even though he wasn't, I was just watching the video that his sister and his friends did an interview, and they're going and speaking to all the local and beginning to speak to international media. He wasn't, the activist out there on the streets, but he was doing the activism from his love and passion for nature. And he used to say that, whatever you don't document, whatever species you don't document, it didn't exist, and you cannot protect it. So it seems like this guy was just a young talent on the rise in the biology field. When he was 9 years old, he was really interested in that. And at 11 years old, he was already collaborating with international biologists, documenting and describing wildlife. So he was doing his work from that, academic and field work. And I guess, I could see how some people could see that as a threat, because the more we describe our diversity or mega diversity, actually, those are hard facts that they need to face with environmental laws. So it's really clear to pursue that line of investigation, to find out the true cause of death why this guy was killed, because he was a really peaceful guy, just doing his own thing, and that's very unfortunate. And just like, I think it has concerned the whole community of students and scientists and environmental activists and everybody who can see that thread. We could see immediately why that happened. And so it's important to bring these conversations to the public view, because, end of the day, and, we're all partly guilty of this, because it's us, driving consumption up, and we're feeding this machinery that's hungry. And end of the day, we're part of this whole big industrial and economic ecosystem, and we definitely need to redirect it, and that's where the challenge remains. And I think everybody has an important role to play. Like, you're doing the podcast, people are planting wild tending out there. If they're starting to do their crafts to reduce their consumption, or document wildlife, or preserve ancient knowledge, it's all part of it. So yeah, we're really sad in the Oaxaca community because of this, but it's definitely coming from a bigger system if we look at the big picture. And that has to do also, even though we have a really progressive president with Lopez Obrador, who's really, really working or trying to work for the people, with the people, but this guy still operates in an economic and political system that demands from us growth and economic growth, and the business community in Mexico, it's divided. Some of them are really pushing forward to big projects, big development, GDP growth, and others, they're more understanding of just the world situation with COVID-19, and I guess some more socially driven business people that are siding with our president. But however, he has like two big projects for the region of Oaxaca that are being pushed right now. One of them is the Isthmus Industrial Corridor that's going to link the port of Veracruz and Salina Cruz to link the Gulf of Mexico with the Pacific, with a cargo train to be a competition to the Panama Canal, to bring goods from Asia to the east coast of the US much faster. And also, the other big one that's near that region is the Mayan train that's going to link different touristic routes from Merida, all the way to Cancun and the Mayan Peninsula with all the pyramids. So those two big projects are actually going to take place in the most mega diverse regions of Mexico. So the times that we're going to see moving forward, are going to be very stressful on the native people that live on these areas and on the environment. Already, what if you have heard of the Zapatista movement? They've already spoken against these projects, because again, it's an imposition from the federal government to the native land, to the native people, for projects that they didn't ask for. Like, these communities, they don't need mega trains to take them from Cancun to Merida in 2 hours. They don't need cargo systems, to go through their lands. They actually, don't need those 9-to-5 jobs working for a maquiladora, for these low-paid jobs on assembly lines to put together goods for the mass consumption in the US. And so this is the clash of two worldviews again that's happening. And I think that's what's driving this whole situation. And on the bigger scale, like, I hope that with this slowdown of the world economy, people are seriously questioning, our role in it, and seriously questioning, do we really want to push this machinery? Do we want to keep literally giving our lives, because that's what we do. We sacrifice our lives to give to this machinery. And I'm not saying that, it's all bad, but definitely it needs a rehumanization.
There seems to be a few layers of things happening in some ways, like, at least, I mean, there, but also I've been seeing it here the more I've explored the Southwest, which has a lot of indigenous peoples and a lot of mining and environmental things going on too. And just, I had no idea growing up where I grew up on the East Coast of the US and like the South, really how much like environmental racism plays into it as well. Like how Native communities get taken advantage of more easily when there was a mine that wants to come in and do what they want to do. Like Gabe and I this winter there was this thing called the Walk to Oak Flat that happened. It's been happening every year ever since this land swap happened, where some public land that is sacred Apache land got traded to a mining company from South Africa, and it's supposed to be the biggest copper mine in, I don't know if it's the country, the world. It's a huge copper mine, like a mile long, something crazy. And it was like for thousands of years sacred Apache land, and then it was even protected by a president, a past progressive US president, and then somehow it now is in a mining company's hands. And it's like this small group of people against this huge force that's basically propelled by our consumption. I mean, copper is mainly what they're mining, and copper is in everything. Our phones, the computer that we're talking on right now. It's like,
yeah, I know, we're all guilty of it.
It's like, I think about the clashes of two worlds that can happen in a lot of places, including here in the US. But in where you are, it's like you have foreign corporations and you have the Mexican government, which is like, and then you have indigenous communities in the place where you are, and like the different layers of what people want and don't want and like need. And I in some ways, I mean, I feel like I'm sad that people have been dying from COVID, but I also am feeling like a gratefulness that it's forcing us to slow down a little bit, and I hope that actually means that some of those projects don't happen.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it has been slowing down, and it's definitely showing us, a tiny little, 1 frame per second glimpse into what is possible if we don't, all give our lives to feed this machinery or this, just system. It's just the story of Native people, because when just the international economy, the trade and capitalism, just has been operating on this, finding those precious resources and channeling them to big cities where the resource hungry populations live. And that's just the nature of cities. We have to bring a lot of stuff in from somewhere else. And also, that's what has been the most affected by COVID-19. It's a direct hit on big cities. And some people in the past have heard, oh, cities are so natural. They're not the natural way of life. And, I only came to realize that that's true, with this COVID-19 happening. Because like I said before, in our small communities, we live pretty spread in the land, and even though we're tightly woven communities, so far we have remained pretty clear from COVID-19. And even a friend of mine actually works in the biotech industry, and they're also developing some types of either vaccines or like antibodies for COVID-19. But they noticed, they found a paper saying that most of the people in the O type blood group, what? blood group, they are not as susceptible to COVID-19. And turns out that most indigenous folks here in Central, at least, I don't know, but he said like in Central America are in the O type group. I was like, oh, that's kind of a relief. If nature ever had, in mind. But anyway, yeah, I think part of the reason, a lot of these communities are already very isolated, small little communities in the middle of the mountains. You have to take a bus to the nearest town, and then you have to walk 2 or 3 hours to get to those communities. They are already living that natural isolation.
I think about like the Navajo reservation, which is just south of where I'm recording this in the Four Corners region of the U.S. It's really rural and isolated, but I think as I record this, it's the #1 area in the U.S. with the highest amount of cases and deaths. And of course, again, that links back to an environmental racist kind of like connection because of the history of what's happened on the Navajo and on those lands with uranium mining and the pollution, and there's no water. A lot of the times people there's no grocery store for an hour, like the water is polluted. They have to go haul water from an hour away. People live in like homes all clustered together, and it's just that the quality of the land and the air and the water has been compromised, and so those people are more susceptible. And it's
and it's the result of years of systemic oppression, hundreds of years. The Navajo Nation or the Diné Nation has suffered a lot of this in their flesh. And I was aware by some Diné weavers in I think the Black Mesa that also had a coal mining company operating there. And yeah, they have it really harsh with no running water. But what I've been seeing too, and like I said, this is a great challenge, but also a great reminder, to reconnect us with nature. Because, and I don't know the specific, situation in Navajo Nation, but that's why here we're so happy that it rains, because we also do dry farming. And when it rains for everybody. But also, it rains and it doesn't only feed our land, it feeds our spirit. So as long as it keeps raining, we keep operating in a self-sufficient way. And we also see the value of the real richness of life. Because as long as you're able to grow your own food, as long as you have the sovereignty of your land, then you can remain resilient. And like I said, I don't know the specifics of all these Diné communities that are affected, but it's a great time to come back to the corn, to the milpa, to the Three Sister seeds, and to plant our food gardens. Because like I've seen these donations and everything comes wrapped in plastic. A lot of these foods are processed foods that are not healthy. And so it makes me question the nature of these donations, and then the fact that you're always depending on these systems. Whereas we should, remember the way our ancestors lived on this land. And that's, I think the true value. That's where we should really focus our efforts on. And it's a great way to remind us that, this system doesn't care for us. It doesn't provide for us. It wants us to be dependent on them. And so water is it's the true source of life. If we don't have wells, or if it doesn't rain, at least in these dry regions, literally it's like a thread of life that runs from our umbilical cord to the land and then rises up to the sky. And we feel that in a life and death situation. And at least here I understand that's why we're the cloud people, because we see that direct connection, to the patterns of the rains from the clouds. That's our life, that invisible thread. It's what's feeding our life. And when you see that real connection in life, then you value things differently. And if there are no tourists around to buy you rugs, fine, as long as it keeps raining. And that's what the elders here said, as long as it keeps raining, we'll be fine. And none of them were afraid. None of them fell into this panic. They were like, yeah, I'm not fearing death. I'm not gonna go around and hoard foods or toilet paper. Just so ridiculous, right? But it's so amazing, to see the maturity of our communities. Like, I can definitely see it now, like in these scenarios. We're pretty resilient in that way.
Yeah, the relationship with rain, being here in the Four Corners, it's been a very dry spring, and any sign of potential rain, we're like, oh my gosh, we're like praying, we're like, come on.
Yeah.
And even like to the point of really dancing around, like, come on, like rain. Like, just seeing how much it brings. And then when it did rain a little bit one day, a couple days ago, the wind came with it was such a crazy wind, and then it almost looked like it kind of sleeted a little bit, even though it's not that cold out, and it was just like a big burst for like 45 minutes, and then it was done. And we're like, well, it was something. It really felt like something, to hold on to. But it's new for me. Yeah, again, being from the South, where it's like a jungle, and where it could rain.
There you're praying for sun.
You're praying for a dry period, so your squash don't drown and rot before they ripen, So yeah, and then it's sometimes I've been frustrated thinking about planting anything that I have known how to plant in other environments here, and being like, how is it going to grow? Like, how does it grow without rain? Like, and here there's issues with water that isn't good to use. Like, the water's salty here, so you have to haul water as well. And it's not like polluted like on the Navajo in the Navajo Nation, but it's like, it's just not good for the plants, so we have to go find water somewhere else. And it's pretty crazy, feeling that the rain spirits
miss a beat, you'll just skip stones. A lioness and a coward, my power, prowess, and prayer, my truth feeding in the lair. Bloody paws, mane of flowers, our powers out magic theirs, our truth feeding in the lair. So gather the necessities for a ceremony or life. Only take what you need and learn to give thanks for your time. Abalone, shell, sage, and cedar. Tend to the calls that feed imagination. just skip stones. A lioness and a coward, my power, prowess, and prayer, my truth feeding in the lair. Bloody paws made of flowers, our powers out magic theirs, our truth feeding in the lair. So gather the necessities for a ceremony or life. Only take what you need and learn to give thanks for your time. Abalone, shell, sage, and cedar, tend to the cause that feed. Imaginations of ether beat with the arteries, then burn with a humble fever. Tend to the ones in need of an honorable griever. Bend with the corn and weed out the creeping deceiver.
So do most people there grow the Three Sisters or the milpa like
Yeah.
still, and do people do like monoculture type stuff, or is it kind of a mix of a little bit of both, or like some people do and some people don't?
So here in Oaxaca, there is 570 municipalities. 400 of those still function in the traditional, what's called usos y costumbres, which is our autonomous way of governing ourselves. And if you live in these communities, if you're from here, it's your birthright to have a little place of land to build your own house and to grow your own food. So most families will have access to, a little patch of land to grow the milpa, the Three Sister seeds, corn, beans, and squash. And so, yeah, that's something that we've been so devoted to, that it's so ingrained in our rhythms of life. Like the big celebration in our town happens around July, the first Wednesday of July, which is around the peak times of corn sowing. And it's, around the time where the land has received enough water, is wet and moist and ready to be planted. And then our biggest celebration, or other one, is around the Day of the Dead, with the harvesting of the corn, when the corn dies and turns yellow. So yeah, no, everybody, when we're planting corn, everybody's either taking their oxen with the plows, ready to plow the land and sow, or riding their bikes or their pickup trucks and ready to plant their little patch of land, because the milpa system is really generous. We plant in July, say, and then we need to 2 weeks after we plant, or roughly, we need to do some weeding and turn the rows. I don't know what it's called in English, but so the corn sits on top of the row, and then you do some more weeding, and then literally like 4 weeks after you've planted, or less, actually, as soon as you've planted, you could start harvesting wild foods, like the wild amaranths, what we call quelites. Those weeds are all edible, and they're super rich in iron and good nutrients, purslane and other weeds that grow around here. And then you start eating the tender leaves of the corn, of the squash, and then all the wild herbs like chapil that you could collect and gather. Then you don't have to wait that long, but with very little work. You plant in July, you do some weeding work, and then you could start feeding your family, and you harvest, or you could start harvesting in October, like the sweet corn. And in November, you could start drying your corn. So I think it should be like an acre of land, will give enough food for a family of 6. So, and, with the milpa, you get the 22 essential amino acids that the body needs to grow. So with that food system, you are already, self-sufficient. And the rest of the material needs are, just a surplus that if you have good, if you don't, it's okay. But the real wealth of our people is in the milpa.
It's interesting. I've been thinking a lot, and I've been having conversations on the podcast recently about wild tending and agriculture and the history of agriculture and the blurry line between what we consider wild and wild tending, and then what we consider agriculture, and when is suddenly agriculture a bad thing, and it's
Yeah.
And I think about the milpa system, and that's been done by indigenous peoples all over for a really long time in different ways,
Yeah.
and it's farming, but it's like low impact too, and it
Yeah.
can be in the wild, and it's like, yeah.
Actually, it's more in the agroecosystem, because unfortunately, with the Mexican Revolution, well, the Spanish invaded our land. So the Spanish families took over hundreds of hectares of land and enslaved our people to tend it, to do agriculture, European agriculture on it. So with the Mexican Revolution, we recovered those lands, or most of them. And the slogan was, La tierra es de quien la trabaja. The land belongs to those that work it, or that work on it. However, that has a slight or a major what do you call it? It goes against one of the principles that our ancestors followed, which is that, well, first of all, that the land is communal, and then second of all, that the land needs a period of resting. So what happened is that after the Mexican Revolution, in order to keep possession of your land, you have to keep working it. And if you leave your land to rest and recover and return to the wild, then you lose your protection of that land, and therefore, the land doesn't have a chance to rest and recover, where the big mesquite trees grow with their deep roots, that are so deep that are breaking up the soil and pulling up nutrients and fixing nitrogen, so that that's becoming harder. And we just had a case here in my family. My great-grandfather used to cultivate a plot of land, and then my grandfather did, and then they left it to rest. And even within our community, then like the neighbor was like, oh, they're not tending their land. So they just encroached it, and now they're taking over some of our land that belonged to our family line. So it's really it's really different now. But it's also our homework to do, to revisit the ancient ways, and to remember that our ancestors, they were planting mesquite trees as food as well, because they were making flour from mesquite, and they were using a lot of the trees, as part of the bigger ecosystem in their management of the milpa system. So it's not just the tree sisters, but it's actually all the other ecosystem, all the other trees and the cactus, and also the agave. And I've heard too that one of the reasons why we didn't domesticate animals here, like for meat, like goats or this, is because the milpa system already attracts so many birds, and and deer and other mammals to feed from it too. So by planting the milpa, you're also feeding the wild. And then, then you could have, access to meat, that feeds from your milpa as well. So there is, there's a fine balance there in the way the milpa system, at least the ancient way, in the way it's done in ancient times, it's a really well-balanced system that's interacting with flora, fauna, trees. And so I think for us too, it's a time where we should question, the ways we're keeping, and how we can adapt so that we can be able to preserve our lands, either from our own neighbors or from mining companies. And because that's the other fear, they say, if you're not working the land, then that land is more susceptible to be taken over by mining companies, because then in the federal laws, then it's just a communal land that's sitting idle. But it's harder to take that land if there's farmers on it, if there's actually families there. And that has been one of the reasons why here on our local radio, they are running some ads saying that, if you have land, you should be working it, because there's mining companies around, and we're gonna have to protect our fields again. However, going back to the wild tending, what happens if everybody starts clearing up their lands, pulling out the mesquites and cutting cacti that have grown on it for like 100 years or 50? Then we're disrupting that ecosystem, and that's not gonna be good for us too. So yeah, I definitely I'm planning to go to the station as well and talk about wild tending and try to bring back this conversation to the table, and yeah, to use more more of the agroecosystem view, that those mesquites, the acacias, they have a role in the ecosystem, and we don't want a countryside that looks just so barren and so plain. So, and also our local laws need to, our tradition admits that yes, you have the right to let your land rest, but unfortunately the law, at least the federal law, doesn't acknowledge that. And so that's something that on the bigger scheme of things, the native people here have to just bring to the conversation at the federal level, and have that be considered.
Yeah, I've spent some time with mesquite when I was in southern New Mexico this winter, and people would say it's a weed tree, or it takes over, it's no good,
Yeah.
And then I read something about how it has increased because of overgrazing of cows, and the bunch grasses that, at least in the Southwest and into Texas and stuff, have been bunch perennial grasses that are important for holding the soil together. Like, because of overgrazing with cows, it has killed the bunch grasses, and then mesquites have been like, okay, well, we'll just come in then, and but they're a nitrogen fixer, and they're a wonderful tree and really tasty pods too. I hadn't thought about and I think in there and in the Southwest as well, here in the so-called U.S., people planted it as well for this maybe similar reasons.
Because I mean, when I traveled to Utah and Colorado, well, I haven't been to Colorado, roughly New Mexico, I just feel like at home. Like, I can read the cloud patterns. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see what's happening here, and it definitely could relate to those ecosystems. And they're corn people as well as we are here, and we've been trading for so long too. We give them our macaw feathers in exchange for their turquoise and other goods. So yeah, we know about the place, and actually we're part of this bigger corridor of life. that is the Jaguar corridor that starts in Central America and goes all the way to Utah. And that's part of what's been disrupted with the Mayan train that's going to benefit tourism. And I think it's important that we're aware of these bigger systems at work on the land, by nature, by the people, the native people, and then the bigger economic and industrial systems, because these three are interacting, and often they have conflicting interests. And end of the day, we have to keep that balance, and that's what our ancestors really, that's their main teaching, to live a life of a balanced life. And they saw the forces coming from the sky to the forces of the underworld. When we weave the tree of life, we weave the clouds and the roots in the underworld. And just going back to the whole conversation, just tying all the threads together, this is what's happening, this great rebalancing of energy flows from cosmic cycles, from the tilt of the earth, from whatever is driving climate change, that's seeping down to our ecosystems, seeping down to our lives. And then it's also going in the underworld, with all the deaths happening, with earthquakes, volcanoes erupting. Like, our ancestors saw this whole system. And in our limited linear view of life, in this capitalistic linear system where we extract, produce, and discard, there's no chance for these cyclical views to take place. And so what needs to change, it's just this view of life, which, sometimes we think, change is so hard. What will it take for humanity to change? Will it take a revolution? Will it take a great leader? Will it take a political party? And it seems like in reality, all that it needs, it's just a change of story, just a deep breath, and then to turn away from this system, because we're the ones that keep feeding them. And what is it but a dream, but a story that we've chosen to believe, that progress means this material shiny world, or this monetary fictional value that we put on paper, or on economies or countries. So in reality, we've seen how the 1% is accumulating so much wealth, right? I was just reading how, like, what is it, the U.S. average income is like $68,000, and that's the height of a quarter, the thickness of a quarter. And Jeff Bezos, like multi-billion dollar net worth, if you stack quarters, it has to be like 16 miles to be able to represent what he owns, compared to, like, a quarter. I mean, it's incredibly crazy, this current world situation that we're living in. And we're not realizing that we have the power to change it. When we go to the Jaguar Mountain, the sacred Jaguar Mountain that's known as Monte Alban, as a touristy site where the first great city in this continent was built, we learned that this city was buried around 900 of the current era. It was later used by some Mixtec governors to be buried. But mainly, the question is, like, why was it abandoned at the same time as Chichen Itza, Palenque, and many other, like Teotihuacan, many other sacred sites across this continent? And I've heard word from a traveler who spoke to a Mayan elder and of the lineage, of governors. His surname was Balam, and this guy said, "Yeah, no, we choose to abandon these places. You know, we buried them because we wanted, and we choose to bury our cities to return to nature, to a smaller way of living." And that book, "Small is Beautiful," you know, kind of um, describes that what that could look like, and you know, the power is in within our decision, and right now we're being shown how it could change. And so that's what I've been asking people, you know, are we ready to abandon our comforts and our way of life? Because, you know, yeah, if we're not ready, you know, in our stories, in our oral stories, there has been 4 creations, and this is the 5th one. And every creation, you know, the ancestors of the human beings were either destroyed or later destroyed by the gods or by the forces of life. You know, because they didn't listen, because they didn't do what they had to do. And so they say that the corn people, this 5th son, we are better able to listen and to change. And so I believe, you know, that that it is possible, and it is possible to maintain that balance between the forces of the cosmos and the earth, and just living this life of balance and harmony. We can find our true face and our true heart, and find that fulfillment that we need to, or that we came to experience in this world of 4 directions. Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for sharing
crazy.
that.
A lot of these stories, sorry, I'm just gonna say one last thing that I remember now.
Go ahead.
I mean, they're really prophetical. My great uncle Perfecto, my dad tells me the stories of, you know, he would gather all the kids in the family and tell them stories around the fire. And they already saw all this coming, you know, talking about, they said there'll be a time where you will plant corn and it will only grow, you know, like 3 feet tall, barely produce. And they said, but don't worry, there'll be other foods to eat, you know. And but bear in mind, they're telling this to corn people, you know, where if you don't eat a corn tortilla, it's like you didn't eat. It's not like it's a good thing. It's the worst that could happen. It's like a nightmare. And my dad was, you know, laughing. He was like, no, but we have so much land here, you know, we'll just plant everything. We'll have food to eat. But you know, my great uncle told them, no, you know, there'll be other times, and they were kind of warning us for what's happening. And now, similar to well, the federal government had a plan, the last government, to eradicate hunger across Mexico. And what they did is just to team up with all the food multinationals and big companies to bring packaged foods to every corner store in every little town. That was their plan to, you know, fix hunger in Mexico. And just more, you know, just industrially processed foods with additives, and that's you know, that's not the way. But they were already foreseeing it, and they would tell stories too when people would use plastic instead of money. They're like, and my dad never really. They was like, what? That sounds so weird. Bear in mind, that's when, you know, people used to bite into coins to make sure they were legit. And now, you know, well, our currency, our paper currency, it's turning into literal plastic to make it more resilient and cleaner. And somebody in the local government, I don't know if they got a letter or something from the state or federal government, saying that, cash should be minimized because of COVID-19. And, they're trying to make people, use credit cards and cards more because cash is dirty, as we know. But, all those prophecies that my dad grew up hearing in his lifetime, they're like all happening slowly. And so, sometimes the stories, at least here, they sound so ancient that it's hard to relate. But some of them are like so like immediate, like we're seeing them in our lifetime.
Wow, yeah. I was reading something about how they were worried because more in America anyways, more people are saving money and that's bad for the economy. Like less people are paying off their credit card debt because they don't want to be in debt because they're unsure of the future, and they were like, that's bad because investors make money on people's credit card debt. And I'm like, wow, how backwards, like wouldn't we want to encourage people to not be in debt? But yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I've been seeing online, you're not having as many tourists come and stay with you or in your community right now, and you have been helping folks sell rugs and stuff or weaving in the community. Do you want to, before we wrap it up, do you want to speak to that a little bit and how people could, support your community's craft?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we have a foot on this world and a foot in the other, and just what we do to to be able to have access to those comforts of life is to sell the rugs in exchange of money. And so that's what we've been doing. And luckily, a friend of mine helped me build a website, so I have a website now, and with some traction from Instagram. You could follow us on Instagram. It's Dixza Rugs Organic Farm all together. And I post there regularly too, if you want to follow me. And you could also check our website where you could buy directly. It's www.dixza.com, and that's Dixza.com. And I'll be posting more and more rugs. Other families, I think the word has gone around that I can sell rugs online, so they're reaching out and bringing me some rugs, and I can only take them on consignment because there's only so much inventory you could carry. So I'm gonna post more regularly. So if you can share your monetary wealth with us in exchange for a rug, or if you know someone who's able to, please share that with them. And we share our craft, our stories, and the teachings. These rugs are like our books. They're the living tradition, the living knowledge of our ancestors. And they bring this message of this land to you. And I hope that they bring some of that beauty to your home and your heart. So yeah, please, if you can, support us. And if not, we're doing pretty well as long as it rains.
Totally. Yeah, I'll post in the show notes all the links to the website and your Instagram and stuff, which I appreciate too. You're always telling wonderful stories on there about people in your community and about the rugs, or about how a lot of these issues that we've been talking about too. So it's very beautiful and educational. So I appreciate all your shares.
Yeah, thanks. Luckily, we've had a few sales from that, so my dad doesn't think that I'm just wasting my time on my phone anymore.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I see what you're doing.
You're like, okay, I see, it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great way to stay connected in the clouds. We're the cloud people.
Yeah, I know, what a crazy time to be like staying at home and staying very local and very still, and yet we're still able to chat from far away. It's It's kind of
Yeah.
cool, even though, there's copper in my computer, but I mean, I think, but,
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely precious metals that were mined and taken away from people. But this is also, it's the beauty of thing. Everything has its good and its bad side. It's we live in a world of duality, and it's our work to maintain that balance. So if we use these tools to do good work and spread awareness and to have the conversation that's going to lead to change, then that's worth the pain. But if we're just just feeding a system that's going to have more Instagrams and Ubers and what have you, or things that don't really add value to our lives, then probably we should question that. And it seems like there's two worldviews at play as well. What I'm seeing, like with Jeff Bezos, for example, and like Elon Musk and all these people, the ultra billionaires, kind of pushing a space race to, because they know, I think they're afraid that statistically at some point, just life on Earth is so fragile. If a volcano erupts or if an asteroid falls on the Earth and alters the climate, we don't have any insurance on that here, they think. And so it seems like they want to escape the world, and there's on this race to colonize Mars or the moon and to move away from here, when we're already on our spacecraft here that's resilient, that's self-sufficient, it grows our own food, it gives us everything we need, it's self-healing. We just need to let it be. And so I guess we're gonna choose our teams at some point, if we want to stay indigenous to this earth or if we want to be extraterrestrial.
I know, take care of the earth, and it takes care of us.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for speaking with me again, Samuel. And I've been thinking about it for a while. We've talked about it a couple times as we've seen each other in person or talked online. We're like, we should do another podcast. So I'm glad that we got to do it again. I was hoping to come visit you there at some point and do it there, but I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. So this is for now. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm always happy and really yeah, it feels good to have these conversations. And then yeah, we'd love to hear what people are thinking and saying, so we'll keep track of that on social media.
Cool. All right, well, you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, and may the rain come there soon and plentiful.
Yes, I hope so too.
Okay.
Cool.
Hasta luego.
You just listened to a conversation with Samuel on the Ground Shots podcast, and I will have linked in the show notes links to Samuel's family's website and also Samuel's personal Instagram and his family's Instagram, as well as any other relevant articles or links to the topics that we spoke on in this episode. Also, I wanted to share that the music for this podcast episode was by Marie Sue, and the song that was played is called Grief in Exile. It's off of Marie's most recent album. Alright, thanks for listening, y'all, and until next time, take care. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.